Okay, so Boker Tov and Shavua Tov. Our hero for today is Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, a very famous figure and extremely influential on the development of Torah study as had continued in the last 100 years, as we would explain. And also a very interesting personality, a very important one by its own right, and is not the founder, but is the second in the dynasty of the Soloveitchik family. His father also was a very important rabbi, as we'll explain in a minute, but a very important family in understanding the shaping of what is today, we may say, Orthodox Judaism. And I would, obviously, he is a person that you can easily give 5, 10, or 15 shiurim about, and we'll try to squeeze everything into 1 hour, but hopefully we'll be able to get at least the essence of what we can learn, what can we understand from his life and his Torah. So just to understand the background for Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. And in order to understand the background, he was born in 1853 in the city Voložין. But we have to understand a little about what does it mean to be born in Voložין, because it is incorrect to say, as I just said, that he was born in the city of Voložין. He was born in the yeshiva of Voložין. Now, the yeshiva was in the city. So what do I mean when I say that it is incorrect to say that he was born in Voložין? I will try to explain. The yeshiva of Voložין was founded in 1802 by Rabbi Chaim of Voložין, about whom we already spoke at length. Rabbi Chaim of Voložין, who is seen as the founder, as the father of the founding father of the modern yeshiva world. And Rabbi Chaim of Voložין himself was a student of the Gaon, of the Vilna Gaon, of the Graf, Rabbeinu Eliyahu of Vilna. And it was important and special in being the first of its kind, the yeshiva, I mean, which was a yeshiva that was not bounded to a certain city. It was local, it was established in a certain city. Everything in our world must have a geographical place. But it is not financed or relied in any way on the city, on the Jews of Voložין. It was international. Of course, it was only for one nation. It was for the Jews. But we'd say international in the sense that it was geographically, it was attractive to at least in theory, to every Jew on the planet. Obviously, you did not have too many students coming from North Africa to the yeshiva. So it was basically for European Jewry, but it was for all of European Jewry. And it saw itself as a yeshiva that is directed for the sake of Torah study, because it did not, as the other yeshivot of the time, at least in Europe, other yeshivot, let's speak about the Khatam Sofer. Khatam Sofer, the huge yeshiva. It did not, in its numbers, it was not much less, and many times it was more, than the yeshiva of Voložין in number of students. But the Khatam Sofer was first and foremost a Rav. He was a Rav, he was an Av Beidin. Halachic questions would come to him, and he had a yeshiva in which he would teach Torah. And when your Rosh Yeshiva, your esteemed, your honored Rosh Yeshiva, is a Rav of a city, then obviously as a student, as a Talmid, what is the orientation of your studies? Studying in order to be the best posek, the best halachic authority that you can be. And that was the basic way of learning in the yeshiva of the Khatam Sofer, and in most of the yeshivot of the time and of all times. So you learn Torah in order to become a great in Torah. When you'd be a great in Torah, a great Torah scholar, then you'd be able also to take a rabbinic position and to teach Torah. So I do not mean chas v'chayil in any way that the students were learning Torah in order to earn money or to get honor. They learned Torah for the sake of Torah, but it was clear that the sake of Torah is to become an expert in Torah, in halacha, and be able to lead the Jewish people closer to the Creator, closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by instructing them how to enact their daily life and what halacha is teaching them. Even it was so simple, this connection between learning Torah and passing halacha, that the whole discussion that I'm doing right now would seem to many people as truism, as something that is so simple. What are you speaking about? However, when you establish a yeshiva that is for the sake of yeshiva, and while Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin may have been or may have been not the formal Rav of Volozhin, his heart was not into passing halacha. He did passing halacha, but that is not where he was. He was teaching Torah. He was the founder of the yeshiva. And what began with him only became more and more sharp, this distinction between Torah learning and becoming a Rav was becoming sharper and sharper, wider and wider as the generations passed by. And in some manners, we can somehow maybe, and we have to be very careful with trying to describe it in terms from other areas, because the confusion or a mistake can easily be made. But we can maybe give a mashal and say, you have people in university that learn law, an academic learning of law, and you have lawyers and judges. Now, both are dealing with exactly the same material, but from very distinct point of view. In academy, they learn the theory of the law, and they discuss the theory, and they develop the theory of the law. And in the courtroom, they practice law. Now, obviously, these are two sides of the same coin. And some people would not even see any difference, and they would hoop from one side to the other. So he would be a lawyer, and then he would be a judge, and then he would go on to be a professor in university, and everything would be very natural. But for many people, if they are lawyers or judges, then they know very good how to apply the law into real life, concrete life. They don't necessarily have to engage themselves so much with the principles, with the theoretical basics of the laws. And the academic professor, on the other hand, he would be much more engaged in the principles, in the concepts of the law, and the conceptual understanding of the law, and you would be less interested in how exactly can it be applied or not be applied, and what may be the realistic problems with applying his conceptual analysis into the concrete courtroom. And as the yeshiva was not headed by, again, Rav Chaim Volozhin himself was the Rav of the city, but that was not where his heart was. And later on, the other Rashi Yeshiva, some of them were not they were Rabbanim, they were great Rashi Yeshiva, they were great Torah scholars, but they were not poskim. Their head was in learning Torah and teaching Torah. So that slowly but surely created an environment in which Torah for the sake of Torah, which is how Torah Lishma was understood in these places, Torah for the sake of Torah itself was becoming the main idea, to the extent that in some places, in some yeshivot, and Bwołżin one of them, if someone had, for reasons, or let's say he needed a parnasa, so he wanted to begin to learn halacha and to become a Rav, that was sometimes frowned upon. So people would say, he is not learning as he used to, now he's only learning in order to become a Rav. And that was like something that was of a lesser degree. Maybe another example would be from mathematicians, right? And physicists, or pure physicist and a practical one, an engineer. So the people that are more engaged with the pure principles of mathematics, of high mathematics, they do not care if you can use their concept or do not use their concept. They look at, again, with frown. Sometimes they completely disregard these questions. It's a sign for a low mind to ask yourself, how does it help me? You discuss mathematics for the sake of mathematics, for the sake of understanding. And again, the same can be applied here, not mutatis mutandis. You understand that there are differences. But in some ways, the learning for the sake of learning, the understanding of the word of God as it stands to itself, even if it is not applicable in any way, shape or form, then it doesn't matter. What is important is understanding the words of God. And that became, and again, that is not something that was written as an ideology by itself, but it became because of the social circumstances and the way that the yeshiva was built and the way the yeshiva was functioning, then it became more and more apparent that that is the way that is being headed. I can add that it also was in a way, in accordance with the zeitgeist, with the spirit of the time, of science, the new science. The new science was asking itself, what are the principles of the phenomena that we see? We look, right? We look at apples and they fall from the tree. So we ask ourselves, what is the force behind that? We do not ask ourselves right now, how can we use it for our purposes? That would come also. But the first question is, what is the force that maybe is shared with the apple falling from the tree and the stars going on skies? Right? That is a question that before that was not asked in the same way. So trying to understand the principles of physics. And again, I repeat myself, it's the third time, I think. You cannot just say it's the same thing, but it's the same spirit in a sense in which you are looking at halacha and you're not only asking yourself, okay, these are the laws of basar bechalav. Now, how do I conduct my kitchen? You ask yourself, what are the principles behind the laws of basar bechalav? And I want to be exact. We do not speak about the principles in the sense of why did God commanded not to eat basar bechalav? That is an old question. It was discussed many times and many years before Rabbi Chaim, about whom we are going to speak, and was spearheading, leading the type of change in way of learning that I am now trying to present you with. So the question is not the reasons, just as you do not ask yourself, the new science does not ask itself, why is there a gravitational force, or for what sake? That is not a question that you ask. You ask how to best describe the force of gravity. And the same question goes, you don't ask yourself, why is basar bechalav asur? It's asur because God asur it. That is enough for us. The question is, how exactly would you quantify the definition of basar bechalav? Return maybe again to the professor in the university which is dealing with secular law. He does not, there are different methods of how to teach law, but he, in the formalistic way, in the traditional way, you may say, he would not ask himself, why is it that the lawgiver decided that something specifically should be forbidden? The question is, for the practitioners of law and for the academic learning of law, we do not discuss the question of why something should be asur or mutar, why something is forbidden or allowed. The question is, what is forbidden and what is allowed? What are the definitions? And that is where Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik is coming into the picture, is being born. Now, many aspects of what I just described, Rabbi Chaim did not create it. I try to explain why the historical background was there in order for someone like Rabbi Chaim to be able to teach in his Torah, to come to his Torah, and his Torah to be accepted so widely as it had. But nonetheless, he is the figure that is most identified with this revolution and in Torah learning. And that is the background. Now let's begin to speak about Reb Chaim himself. So Reb Chaim himself was born in 1853 in the yeshiva of Bovulozhin. Again, the place is the city of Bovulozhin, but I don't think that he had much to do with the city, with the Jews, the simple Jews of Bovulozhin. He was born to Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, about whom we spoke in, I remember, it was before the war, I think, about whom we spoke, also called the Beit HaLevi, after the book that he has written. So he was the second, you may say, the second in command, the Mishneh Rosh HaYeshiva in Volozhin. The Natziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, about whom we also spoke in the past, was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin for many, many, many years. And the Beit HaLevi was, as I said, his second. And Chaim, Reb Chaim, young Chaim, was born in 1853, in the exact year in which his father was appointed as the Mishneh to the Natziv, as the Mishneh to the Rosh Yeshiva, 1853. He was born on Shushan Purim, which is a day that A, is near to us, and B, I have a personal relation to, because I was also born on Shushan Purim. So he was born on Shushan Purim at 1853. Now, the Natziv and the Beit HaLevi they were great friends, and they really appreciated each other, but they had a very different view of how Torah should be taught in the yeshiva of Volozhin. The Natziv was for what we would call today Bekiut, so learning at great breadth, understanding, trying to see the Torah in its different parts, one in light of the other, and knowing Gemara, Shas, Poskim, Rishonim, and trying to conquer as much of it as you can. That is, again, very, very, very broadly and basically his view. And the Beit HaLevi, which is the father of our hero of today, was of the opinion that it is better to learn in depth than learn in breadth. Now, obviously, all of them believe that you need to do both, right? That's not a question. But the question is, when I teach a student in his first, second, third year in yeshiva, what should I emphasize? Should I emphasize the in-depth and let the bekiut run its course, or should I emphasize the bekiut at the breadth and let the in-depth learning to come when the student is ready for it? That was the question, and it created many tensions, again, on the not on the personal level, chas v'chayila, but in the way to manage the yeshiva. And the long and the short of it is that after 12 years as co-partners in heading the yeshiva, the Beit HaLevi decided that he is leaving Volozhin. The Natziv was not very happy with that. He did try to convince the Beit HaLevi to stay, but the Beit HaLevi left the yeshiva and became a Rav in a city named Slotsk. Of course, Chaim Soloveitchik was 12 years at the time, moved with him. Now, Chaim Soloveitchik was very sharp and genius as a young boy. Again, it is very rare of us to speak here about someone and to say, yes, he was a blockhead when he was a child. That usually would not make him into an interesting topic for our shiuri. So he was a genius. There are a few stories which I quoted here in the first source. It is very interesting that while Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik is widely accepted in, I think, all of Orthodox Judaism as one of the greatest Torah scholars of the last generation, nonetheless, I think to this day, there is no authoritative biography that was written on him. There are many, many Maiselach books. So, for example, you can go to the library, there's a whole shelf. So these are 2 volumes about Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, but writing a Maise after Maise does not become a biography. And authoritative biography is something that you can rely on the facts and that someone checked them. And all of these stories, some of them are true, some of them are less, some of them cannot be. And they are beautiful, and they can reflect a lot about how Reb Chaim was accepted and seen by the people of his generation, of later generations. But it is very difficult sometimes just to pinpoint simple facts. So it is unclear who taught him in these first 12 years when he was in Volozhin. Now I'm quoting, if you look at source Aleph, I would also share it on the screen. Just a second. Yes. So you see that the first source is from a book named מוולוז'ין ועד ירושלים that was written by Rav Meir Bar Ilan. Rav Meir Bar Ilan, who is very well known because his University Bar Ilan is called after him. He himself was the youngest son of the Netziv. He is the youngest son of the Netziv. And as you would understand in a few minutes, he was also a relative of Karov Mishpacha of Reb Chaim of Volozhin for marriage, as I would explain in a few minutes. He wrote a memoir named From Volozhin to Yerushalayim. He was a Zionist, he belonged to the Mizrahi, and he moved to Eretz Israel. Now, he wrote, as I said, this memoir. In this memoir, there are a few chapters, 2 or 3 chapters, dedicated to the personality and figure of Reb Chaim of Volozhin as he remembered, and from stories he heard going around. Now, again, he was very close to Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. He met him many times, as they were family relatives, so he knew him well. This is one of the sources that you can more or less rely on when you are trying to construct the timeline in the life of Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. But again, there are many, many disputes about facts here, and part of the problem, I don't know if the word is a problem, but part of the issue is that Rav Meir Bar Ilan, as I just mentioned, was a Zionist, a very strong Zionist. And Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik was very far from being a Zionist. And that created a tension. So to what extent can you rely on everything that is written? And to what extent does he try to minimize the opposition of Reb Chaim to Zionism? And also, when you read people that dispute with the biography, autobiography of Meir Bar Ilan, to what extent do they dispute him because really the facts are wrong, and to what extent do they dispute him because everything the Zionist says must be wrong? And that's, I am not an historian. I'm not qualified to judge. I would bring you only the quotations. So let's begin with this memoir by Rav Meir Bar Ilan. And he describes that בהיותו בוולוז'ין, when Reb Chaim was in Volozhin, was a small boy, נער קטן, בן 6 or 7, 6 or 7. By the way, I'm almost certain that the book מוולוז'ין to Yerushalayim was translated into English and can be bought and read to those that are interested. Very interesting book, very interesting sefer. Just again, it's autobiographical and all, as always with autobiographies. Everything should be read with a grain of salt. But is a man of importance, a man of note. He was close to almost everyone that was someone in Orthodox European Jewry. So a very interesting autobiography. When he was in Voložin, a small boy, 6 or 7, למד תורה בחדר של מלמד אחד חסיד סלונימי. So according to this testimony of Meir Bar Ilan, Reb Chaim learned as a small boy in a cheder by a Chassid, a Slonim Chassid. So that in itself is surprising, because his family was a very mitnagdish family. Saying that he was a mitnagdish family, that's almost an understatement. Right? He is coming from the great dynasty of Bוולוז'ין of the Gaon of Vilna. Okay, but that's what we are being told here. So he landed in a cheder by a סלונימי חסיד. Now the סלונימי Rebbe came to Voložין in order to pay a visit. וכנהוג נכנס אצלו המלמד הזה בין שאר חסידיו. So the מלמד of Reb Chaim of Volozhin, the young Chaim, is entering the room where the סלונימי Rebbe is now present. בהיותו מתגאה בזה שתלמידו הוא בנו של רבי יוסף דוב, והוא גם עילוי, לקח אותו המלמד עמו אל הרבה. So the teacher took his gifted student, and also the son of Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi, Rabbi Yoshe Ber. So he took him with himself to the Rebbe, to the Slonim Rebbe. And the Admo very much enjoyed the young boy and gave him an apple. The child took the apple and put him into his mouth without making a bracha. The Melamed was Naboch, right? He was and he was embarrassed. So he began התחיל גוער בתלמידו. So he began to rebuke his students. The Rebbe, סלונימי Rebbe, said to the מלמד, instead of rebuking him, the young boy should rebuke himself because you are responsible, you are his Rebbe. And then Rabbi Chaim said to the Rebbe, you know, but you are his Rebbe. So instead of rebuking him, the little boy said to the Solonim Rebbe. Okay, so that's a story, which, is it true? Is it not true? Let's say that it is true. Just, let's do the historian work. How did it came to be known? It's difficult to believe that the Solonim Rebbe would tell the story around. It's unbelievable that the teacher would tell the story around. So we have to make believe that the child, after saying this chokhmah to the Rebbe, right, came out and told his father that that's the way that he spoke to the Solonim Rebbe, and his father told Rav Meir Bailan. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but you understand why this type of stories are dubious. And maybe they more reflect the way that Reb Chaim family saw Hasidim than the way that Reb Chaim himself was conducting himself in the age of 6. But nonetheless, it's an interesting story about the sharpness of the young Rabbi Chaim. Another story is that once he was speaking with one of his friends, and his father, Rabbi Yosef Ber, asked him as a joke, who is greater in Torah? Right, again, the age of 6 or 7. Who is greater in Torah, you or your friends? And the young Rabbi Chaim said to him, I don't know what to answer because I don't want to speak, to speak in proudly, but I also don't want to lie. Okay, so anyhow, he was a genius. Now, these are chokmah, these are young, small chokmah. To be honest, I think that some of us know children that also can speak that way. But they reflect, it's interesting that the stories being told are not stories about how he knows all of the Shas Baal Peh, not necessarily because he didn't know, but because in this environment, sharpness of the intellect was not less important, again, as the breadth of knowledge. So again, these stories, I'm not sure how much they reflect the young boy himself, but they do reflect the habitat, you may say, the house, the home in which he was growing up. Okay. So that all of that was up to the age of 12. In the age of 12, as I said, his father decided to leave the yeshiva of Voložhin and to become a Rav in the city of Slotsk. His son moves with him, and from there on, it is clear that the most of the learning of Rabbi Chaim was with his father, Rabbi Yosef Ber, the Beit HaLevi. In 1873, we are now skipping. You see, we have holes here. But again, I was trying to go through this different Maisalach. It's very difficult to create anything that is coherent. I think that mostly is just sitting and learning, which again is not a big surprise. And Baruch Hashem, it was quiet, and he was able to sit and learn. In 1873, when he was 20, his grandmother passed away, meaning the mother of Rabbi Yosef Ber, the mother of the Beit HaLevi. The Netziv came to pay a Shiva visit in Slotsk. And in Slotsk, when he was making the Shiva, when he was making the Nichumim, he had a suggestion. He said to Rabbi Yosef Ber, you have a son, brilliant son. I have a granddaughter. Let's marry them together. Now again, they had disagreements, disputes about how to teach Torah, but they were very appreciating each other, though they have no problem with such a shidduch. What is interesting is that when they ask the young man already, 20 years old, Rabbi Chaim, his answer was, I don't even have to go and see her because I already remember her from when I was in Voložhin, and I like her. So that's an interesting answer. On one hand, it shows you his modesty. I didn't even want to see. Maybe she changed from the age of 10. So he was not very interested in that. On the other hand, he remembered her, which in itself is interesting. Years later, 8 years later, he remembered her and thought that she is an appropriate candidate for Shidduchim. And that really was, the Shidduch took place. The name of his wife was Lipsha. So again, the granddaughter of the Netziv. And he went back to Volozhin in the age of 20 to eat by his grandfather-in-law back to Volozhin. And for 6 years, he did not carry any formal position in Volozhin, but he was acknowledged already as a genius, as a very, very important lamdan. He would speak with the guys. He didn't give a shiur. He was not given a shiur, but he would speak with the guys in learning. And there are many, many stories about how he would speak with them, and he would throw something that would lead them to see the whole sugya in a new light. And it is clear on hindsight that these were the formative years in which he was crystallizing his new method of learning. And we already began to speak about this new method in which you ask yourself about the principles. One of the important terms or changes, we may say, from what was the way to learn before is the question of what is your topic of learning? According to the traditional way, your topic of learning is the text. You took a Gemara and you begin to read it, and then you have difficulties because that's the way the text is built. So one line says X, and 2 lines later it says Y. So why is there a contradiction? How can we solve the contradiction? And why does the Gemara ask this question here and not 2 pages later and not 2 pages before? And what is the meaning of what is the presupposition that allows someone to ask a certain question? And does this presupposition can be applied in another sugya? So this was the way the Torah was learned, and by this textual learning, you came to the conclusions you were supposed to reach. Now, Reb Chaim said, he did not say it, I mean, he was not a philosopher in his nature. So he never wrote his philosophy of learning Torah. Or everything that I'm saying was only written about him by people that learned with him and by everyone almost that learned Torah after the time of Reb Chaim of Bוולוז'ין. But what he did was to shift the emphasis from the text to the content, to the topic itself. So instead of asking why this line contradicts the next one, or why this source, in what ways does it relate to another source, he learned the source, and then instead of, and that now I'd use a distinction I heard from my Rabbi, from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, was the son-in-law of Rav Yosef Dov Alevi Soloveitchik, who himself was the grandson of Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. So in many ways, what I am teaching now is the way that I was taught. And when he read a source, he was not asking, how is it difficult? Not kushiyot, but questions, she'elot. What is the difference? Kushia is something you make when, as you say, you have a problem. So a kushia is a problem. I read a text and I have a problem with the text. But if there is no problem with the text, then I go weiter, I go on. Beautiful, everything is understood. Asking a question means even if the text presents no problem, but I have a question. What is the source of what is written? What is the nature of what is written? Now, what do I mean by that? You are learning Purim, right? We are coming close to Purim. So you are learning the halachot of Purim. And you are being taught, for example, that you need to give mishloach manot. Halacha, Mishnah, Gemara, beautiful. What is the nature of mishloach manot? Now, what do I mean by asking what is the nature? That is not a question coming from the text. You can learn the whole of Masechet Megillah, you would never ask this strange question. What is the nature? I'm being reminded when Rav Lichtenstein came to make an exam, right, before we were able to enter into the yeshiva. So he came to Nativ Meir, that was the yeshiva tichonit where I land in Yerushalayim. And every student that wanted to go to the Gush, to the yeshiva of Rav Lichtenstein, had to take an exam. And Rav Lichtenstein would interview him and ask him questions about it. So you can choose whatever sugya you want, and he would ask you questions. So I took a specific sugya on Baba Batra Daled Amud Bet. You see how I don't remember every Gemara I learned, very far from it, but that was scribed right into my memory. And this is a sugya about if we have two people, neighbors, right, which share a yard. One of them is building a fence around himself. Now, his fence now is also fencing the yard of the guy next to him. So the question is, can the builder of the fence demand at least some compensation from the guy that is now enjoying his fence? That is the question the Gemara is dealing with. His first question, Rav Lichtenstein's first question to me was, in what plane is the Gemara operating? באיזה מישור פועלת הגמרא? I had no idea even how to begin to answer. I learned all of the Gemara. I learned the Rashi, I learned Tosfot, I learned some of the Rishonim. I came in feeling very much prepared. And this question took me completely off guard. I had no idea what he meant. Now, he continued to ask questions, so slowly I understood what he is aiming for. What he meant to ask me was, is this sugya speaking for in the plane of dinei shchenim, the laws of neighbors, is it specific to neighbors and their commitments to each other, or is it a more general question about ze nehene veze lo chaser? What happens if someone derives benefit from someone else without the other one having really to make more expenses for it? So that is the same question as me, for example, let's say a modern question. I'm with my computer outside and I can connect to a Wi-Fi network of someone of the neighbors here. And let's say that doesn't come on his expense in any way. So am I allowed to do so? If I'm doing so, must I compensate him for that? That is a general, there is nothing to do with neighbors. I can go to a whole different city and do that. And this question, what is the nature of this law, would have also many halachic implications, but it would never come to you to ask if you would not begin to think outside of the Gemara, outside of the text. That was the strength of Rabbi Chaim. That is the conceptual way of learning. You see what I just did. I asked about the concept. So again, Mishloach Manot. What is the nature of Mishloach Manot? Now we can speak halachically all day about Mishloach Manot. How many manot should be there? What is the type of mana? Should it be prepared food or unprepared food? And we can begin to bring sources and argue and prove one way or the other. But we can also ask the question, what is the nature of Mishloach Manot? Is the nature of Mishloach Manot, what is the root? Is the root tzedakah? That is one way to say. So Mishloach Manot is a paragraph of the great mitzvah chapter of tzedakah. Or is it part of the mitzvah of seudah? The way to share seudah is when we eat together. So even if I do not host you, but I'm sharing my meal with you, that's part of honoring the seudah. Now, again, this is a question you would never ask just from learning the Gemara. But in the second you ask it, you have a whole new understanding. All the questions that we had, all the difficulties that we had before, that we didn't know how to solve the textual questions, many of them can now be resolved. And also maybe they won't be resolved, but it doesn't matter so much because now our focus, our emphasis is not from the kasha. It is known in the name of Rabbi Chaim that everything is in Yiddish, of course. I have not enough knowledge in Yiddish, not at all almost in Yiddish, so I would say it in Yiddish or in Hebrew as it was given to me. Mikushiyot lo metim. You do not die because you have a difficulty in the text. A textual difficulty, you have a textual difficulty. But if you do not know what is the source and the nature of a certain law, then you shouldn't sleep at night. If you can learn the whole of Masechet Git in Gemara, Rashi, Tosfot, But according to Rabbi Chaim and his successors, the people that continue this way of learning, even if you know the whole of the Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfot, and you can quote everything verbatim, and you ask a question, you can ask, you can give a teirutz. But if you would be asked, is the gittin, the get, is it a form of a shtar, or is it a form of a speech? Right? Is it a way, as in shtar, in the name Mamonot, when I buy something, right, I sign? Or is it a way of speaking, but instead of speaking by the mouth, I'm speaking by a written paper, because then you have testimony, then it's something that can serve later. So what is it? In its nature, in its core, is it a financial, not necessarily financial, but is it a term, the get is a term that is coming from the word of finance, of buying and selling, or of transactions, maybe transaction would be a better word, but a contract transaction? Or is it coming from the word of human interpersonal relationship, in which speech is the king? So that is a question. Again, that is a question. You can learn the whole of Gittin with many mefarshim. You never even think about such a question. But according to Rabbi Chaim, if you didn't ask this type of questions, you're not really understanding anything. That is the revolution of Torah study. And as I said, it began to be formed during these formative years, these 6 years, that he was not yet a Magid Shiur in Volozhin, but he was already acknowledged as one of the important Torah scholars of his generation. In 1879, excuse me, yes. That's a very good question. I would come to the opposition in Be'ezrat Hashem in a few minutes. So in 1879, his father, the Beit HaLevi, is leaving Slotsk and going to become a rabbi in Brisk, a city that would play a very important role. Rabbi Chaim leaves Volozhin and comes to help his father in the beginning in Brisk, and is there for 2 years, where he's again learning with his father and with a kibbutz. That is a gathering of a few important Torah scholars from the area. In 1881, he is given an appointment from the yeshiva of Volozhin to become the Magid Shiur in Volozhin. The Rosh Yeshiva is still the Natziv, the grandfather of his wife, but he would become now the second in command, the Magid Shiur in Volozhin. He would fulfill this position for 12 years, which are in many ways, these are the last 12 years of the Volozhin Yeshiva. The Volozhin Yeshiva would be closed in 1892 by the Russian government. We speak about this very, very famous incident again in a few minutes, Be'ezrat Hashem. But these 12 years were the last years of the Volozhin Yeshiva, and they were also in many ways its greatest years, because then Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin was really teaching this new method, which was now completely formed, it seems, in his mind. He would give a shiur every day, and there are beautiful descriptions of the students that are completely conquered by this new way of thinking that they never, many of the students coming to Volozhin, they didn't come as tabula rasa, they didn't come as a clear, empty paper. They came in with vast knowledge of Shas at very young age, but they never thought in that way. Just as I just described to you, sitting with this question of what is the nature, in what plane this Gemara is open, what do you mean, what plane? But when it's being explained, then a whole new world is opened. And suddenly everything that you discussed before is still very important, but in some ways seems superficial to the core questions that stand in the root of the concept of what we are learning. And this Torah is quickly decimated is the word, and is scattered throughout. The students are coming, they are learning, and they become themselves Rashi Yeshivot. Almost all of the Ashkenazic, the European Rashi Yeshivot in the next generation would be students of Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, and almost all of them learned in Voložhin in these 12 years. So these became very important years in the history of Torah learning in the last generation, the last 100 years. As was noted earlier, it cannot be that such a revolution would go on without its criticizers. And there were. If you would look again at the source page, look at source hey, that's in the second slide. So that was written by the Ridvaz, who himself was from Slotsk, and he made an aliyah to Yerushalayim. And he seems to be not very happy. He writes that in 1918, that is the same year that Rabbi Chaim passed away. I think that obviously if it was published in 1918, he wrote it earlier. But he wrote it when the Torah of Rabbi Chaim was already known. גם בתקופה ההיא נשתנה עיון התורה לגמרי. He says in our time and age, or a few years ago, the learning of Torah completely changed. במקומו, in a certain place, המציא רב אחד לימוד הכימיה. So a certain rabbi had invented chemical learning. What does he mean? המבינים קוראים כימי. So those that understand what he's doing call it a chemical thing, a scientific learning. והרבה קוראים היגיון. Many call that is היגיון, that is logic. וזה הורע לנו מאוד מאוד. So that's a very bad thing. כי הוא רוח זרה. מן החוץ הכניסו לתורה שבעל פה. That is something foreign that came in from the outside. So he says that is a scientific method. You are asking what are the concepts. That is not the way that Torah was learned. Now, again, it is clear that in many places we can demonstrate that Rishonim did ask questions about the core concepts of halachot, of course, but it was not systematic. It only came to the fore when it helped to resolve a certain difficulty in the text, which was the way that they learned, just learning the text once, one after the other. But making that into the core learning, that's something coming from the outside. לא זוהי התורה המסורה לנו ממשה מפי הגבורה. That's not the Torah that was given from heaven. ונתפשט הלימוד הזה בין בני הישיבה שעדיין מחזיקים קצת גמרא בידם. He said, unfortunately, this Torah method learning had נתפזר, right? נתפשט, it was exposed between those that at least can still hold the Gemara. Because many people just leave the yeshiva altogether. And those that stay in the field, they learned this new method. ובלימוד תורה זה אינו מביא האדם לידי טהרה בשום אופן. He says, very interesting critique. He says, this type of learning does not bring you purity. Now, it doesn't explain why, but I would suggest that this type of learning put your mind in a very central place. When you learn the text and you answer difficulties in the text, then the center of learning is outside of you, and you are submitting yourself to the text. But if I'm learning from the text and now I have this conceptual learning going into in my mind, then the place of Torah become my mind, and that is raising the learner himself. And that was seen as problematic. The new method of learning, by the way, one of its magics was that it enabled even very beginning students to have very important ideas, because you didn't have to know in the textual learning, you have to know a lot of steps because before you even begin to ask a question. So many years would just be learning and becoming familiar with the text. But in the new method, then we can sit here and not learn a word in Masechet Megillah, and I would explain the core concepts, and maybe someone would raise a hand and would ask a good question about, because that's as I said, it's logic. Someone that never saw Masechet Megillah, maybe doesn't know how to read Hebrew or Aramaic, would raise his hand and ask a beautiful question and would suggest a different conceptual understanding. So that opens the door to a much more logical learning and less merging yourself into the text. And really, that's what happens. when someone learns in this new method, then you are learning Gemara and Rambam many times, and that is enough. In the traditional learning, you learn Gemara, Rashi, Tosfot, the poskim. But now, just the return to the source, right? You return to the source. So many books that were learned earlier fell to the sidelines, not because Rabbi Chaim was against them, because there was much less room for them in the new method, in the new shita. So the Maharsha, for example, we spoke about the Maharsha, I think 2 years ago. But he was, I cannot right now go into it, but he was someone that was very much into textual learning. And he would take almost every Tosfot. Why do you ask it now? How do you ask it right now? What is the answer? What are the presuppositions of the answer? How do you reject? What is the difference between the question and the answer? And that was the bread and butter of Torah learning Maharsha. If you didn't learn the Maharsha on the Tosfot, you cannot say you learned the Tosfot. After Reb Chaim, it didn't say that what the Maharsha says is incorrect, just not very interesting. Because he is trying to understand the shape of the thought of the Tosfot. And Reb Chaim is offering you the possibility not to understand the shape, but to understand the thought itself, the content itself. And who would want to engage himself with the shape if he can penetrate into the core concepts?
His basis, Reb Chaim's philosophy was that he was coming from the perspective that you can't understand what Torah, like it's to try and understand Torah about head. You put like where's he coming from? You can't understand halachic.
So he didn't write any philosophy book, and it seems that he didn't really engage in these questions. He just learned in a very natural way to his genius mind, and as I tried to explain in the beginning, to the background that he came from. He was not interested in if you are learning in order to pass an halacha, you cannot learn that. Or at least you cannot limit yourself to that way, to be more exact. Why? Because you cannot just come and pass an halacha by having a chakira, right? An investigation into the nature of Mishloach Manot. You need to learn the text, you need to learn the poskim. Let's take a lot of time, and that put your mind in a different mindset. But after Yeshiva Bוולוז'ין was established, and the processes that I spoke about earlier took place, then it became natural for someone, you needed someone in the magnitude of Reb Chaim, but for someone to be able to make this leap and to say, okay, now, and he didn't, I don't think that he ever formulated it that way. I'm speaking by the formulations given by Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, his grandson, in Isha Halacha. That is the best philosophy book if someone is looking for an exposition of Reb Chaim position. Now again, is that what Reb Chaim said to himself? I don't think that he thought in these terms. But after I unburned myself, as it be, keveyachol, from the questions of having to pass halacha, so now I'm only asking about the pure concepts. So obviously these are the concepts. So why would be interested in anything else?
It's good, and through the concept of getting closer to God, because you understand.
I am not aware of any this type of sentences. You have to remember that after Rabbi Chaim of Voložhin wrote his Nefesh HaChaim, claiming that the best way to come closer to Hashem and to improve our world and the upper worlds is by learning Torah, then ideology very much fell to the side. As happens many times in the Haredi world of today, by the way. They can, if you'd ask why it's important to learn Torah, it's important to learn Torah because it's important to learn Torah, and there is no, you don't learn the philosophy. There is no need to. You learn Torah. You engage in the act itself and not in thinking about the act. I think Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik was very much this type of a thinker. As I said, after very good 12 years, in 1892, Voložhin closed down. Voložhin was closed down basically because the Russian government demanded that they would present secular studies into their curriculum. Now, as the legend goes, they were ready, the Rashi Yeshiva were agreeing to close down the yeshiva. Even 1 hour of secular studies would not be taught. Now, this legend was proved long, long ago as incorrect. And it serves a certain agenda, obviously, but it was proved as incorrect. A lot was written about it. I think the best sefer nowadays is by Reb Shaul Stempfer. It's called Yeshivat Bovulozhin or something like that. And he has all of the back and forth with the Russian government. We have the formal letter, so it's very difficult to argue with what he has there. It is clear that they agreed to a certain degree of whole learning. But Russian government didn't want only a certain degree. They wanted to completely take over the institution. And to that, the Netziv and Reb Chaim of Brisk could not agree. And they preferred to close this. I mean, it's very difficult for us to describe. Let's imagine that someone has established Oxford University, and his son is the head of Oxford University, and his grandson, and his grandson, and then the grandson has to close Oxford University. So that is to understand the emotional baggage of this decision. It was it was the life project. The Netziv was very old. All of his life were to sustain Volozhin and to improve it. And suddenly to have to close it, that was a decision that completely broke him. But we spoke about it when we had the shiur about the Netziv. Reb Chaim Brisk was much younger. He was in his 30s. So the yeshiva closed down, and he moved back to Brisk. His father passed away, and he took the Rabbanut of Brisk. Now, in his nature, he was not a city Rav. He was a Maggid Shiur. It's very clear. And Rav Meir Bar Ilan describes that there was a change in his personality, in his attitude. He says when he was a Maggid Shiur, he was always happy and kind, and he was shining. And he said when he became the Rav, he became almost melancholy. He became sad. He was burdened with all the needs of the city. On the other hand, with that, Rav Soloveitchik in his Isha Halacha writes that when Rav Chaim was asked, what is the purpose of a Rav? Now, if I would ask you, I guess that some of you would say pasking halacha, teaching Torah, managing the shul. Rav Chaim says the purpose of the Rav is doing chesed. And he saw himself, and there are dozens of stories, he saw himself as almost a social worker, more than a Rav. In his house, there was an orphan house that was operating. These are amazing stories. Many families were broken. Many husbands were going to America in order to try. It was very difficult for them to take the family. So the husband would go first, would make some money, and then hopefully would send a ticket back and invite his family. We spoke already a few times about this not always happening for many reasons. And then the wife would remain alone without any income, with young children. Who would take care of them? Many times would be Reb Chaim that would take care of them. Some of them he took into his home. There is a famous story, appears almost in every sefer about Reb Chaim, it must be true. They say that once a young woman came to Reb Chaim door and knocked, and Reb Chaim opened, and she says, I cannot feed my baby. I have a very young baby, month-old, and I cannot feed myself, I cannot feed him. And Reb Chaim called the lady that was responsible for, there was a lady charity. So why don't you help this young woman? And she says, come with me to the side. And they go to the side, and she tells Reb Chaim, look, her husband went to America a year and a half ago, and she's now having a baby 1 month old. So we are not going to help her. And Reb Chaim said, not only that you are going to help her, I am going to raise him myself. And he took him into his own house, the mamzer. He took him into his own home. He made the brit himself, so no one would be able to. So Reb Chaim Agadol himself made the brit to the child, so no one would be able to say anything against him. And it seems that it was not a single story, that mothers knew that if Chas v'Chaila, and again, these are very difficult times, it's not for us to judge, but a mother that had to leave her child because she knew she would not be able to sustain him, the place to leave the baby would be on Reb Chaim doorstep. So that was the way that he saw the rabbinut. There was a mageifa, a disease, an endemic in Brisk, and we have many testimonies about Rabbi Chaim himself going outside and taking the sick, and that was endemic. No, that's very, very dangerous. He didn't hesitate. He didn't hesitate. He didn't want to pasken halacha. He didn't want to. He took a Dayan, Reb Simcha Zelig Rieger, who was a very good friend of his, and halachic questions would be referred to Reb Simcha Zelig Rieger. And now, why didn't he want to pasken halacha? It's a very intriguing question. Again, he didn't write any book in which he explains his philosophy. So some say that is because he had these very extraordinary ideas and he didn't want to conflict with the Shulchan Aruch. So he preferred someone else would give the halacha. Some say he was so original and always thinking new ways. So he didn't want to give halacha because maybe tomorrow a new idea. Rav Yosef Adov Alevi Soloveitchik in Isha Halacha says that this is because, as we said earlier, he was in the world of the mathematicians. He was not intrigued with how to apply these principles into the real world. He was interested, he could do that if there was a need, but that was not he was. He wanted to speak about the concept. There is a lot more to speak, but our time is up. And during the First World War, in the beginning, he stayed in Brisk in order to help the people of the community. It was just unfeasible after some time, and he had to abandon. He had to run away. They ran away to Minsk. There, they lived in great poverty. He did not want to get any donations or help, which is something that was a feature of him and his descendants later, not wanting to get any financial help from anyone. He was helping others. And there is a testimony about him of someone that met him in Minsk in these years, and he wrote that he looked like he was 90 years old. He was only 60, but it seems that these troubles had really he paid a high price. In 1918, he passed away because of a liver failure, and he was buried in Warsaw, just next to the Naziv, his grandfather-in-law, which is beautiful that in the end, although they were Rashi Yeshiva in Bוולוז'ין, they found themselves together. And if you go to Warsaw, to the cemetery to this day, the Ohel still stands, and you can visit both graves in the same, under the same roof. It's very interesting that on the Matseva, it was written by his children, very famous children that we don't have the time right now to go in. Maybe Be'ez Hashem will speak about them in a future shiur. But it was written on the Matseva that we have a manuscript from him, which would Be'ezrat Hashem would be printed. So that is a promo on the tomb. And in the end, it was printed only 18 years later. And the reason why, given by his children, that they were in shortage of $600 in order to print the Sefer, but they didn't want. Now, it was very easy to find a donation for a Sefer by Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. They didn't want to take any donation, so they had to save the money by themselves, and it took 18 years for the Sefer to be published. It's as you can see, it's not a very thick book. That is Chidushei Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi al Rambam. A part of this Sefer, that is the only authorized thing that was printed. It was not printed by him, but it was completely written by himself. There are many of his chidushim going around from students that wrote, articles that he wrote to newspapers, students that from his family. I had many traditions from my Rabbi, from Rabbi Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. So many traditions. You can see a whole farim of Maiselach. If someone is interested, many of the stories are extremely interesting. I cannot guarantee you any truthness to any of them. But the stories are very interesting. We didn't speak about his relation to Zionism. We didn't speak about his relation to Limudei Chol. But I think that we had enough in order to get a glimpse to this very interesting personality, which, as I said, has completely changed the way the Torah is being taught and learned, at least in the Ashkenazi yeshivot, and in the last 50 years, I think also in many of the Sephardic yeshivot as well. And Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope that as we continue to speak about the great Rabbani of the generation, then we'd have even a more wider picture of this revolution, of this shift in Torah learning that happened about 100 years ago. Thank you very much. See you בהיותו next week.